Hello, everybody. How are we doing tonight? Welcome, welcome. Happy Wednesday. You know what that means. It's story time. Hello, hello. It's so good to see you all. How have you all been? Missed you too. Alright, so last week we began the story And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So, as a quick catch up, just because I know it's been a long week, basically what happened was these 10 people were all gathered at a place called Soldier Island, which is what I will be referring to it. Now that I know there's an adaptation out there that uses that term, we will be using that going forward. And basically, they were all lured with certain premises, certain promises, only to then basically be stood up by the host and, much to their horror, called out for various instances in which each assembled guest is accused of being party to or directly responsible for someone's death, and that this is a sort of punishment for them. One person has already fallen. How many more will follow? And will there be any left? Alright then. We're going to start with chapter 5. Oh, and for the record, I do not remember the voices I gave everyone. If you somehow remember what voices I gave them and they sound different, rule number 1 of theater, just go with it. Alright. One second, let me just adjust my mic a little bit. Okay, Chapter 5. It was so sudden and so unexpected that it took everyone's breath away. They remained stupidly staring at the crumpled figure on the ground. Then Dr. Armstrong jumped up and went over to him, kneeling beside him. When he raised his head, his eyes were bewildered. He said in a low, awestruck whisper, "My God, he's dead." They didn't take it in, not at once. Dead. Dead. That young Norse god, in the prime of his health and strength, struck down all in a moment. Healthy young men didn't die like that, choking over a whiskey and soda. No. They couldn't take it in. Dr. Armstrong was peering into the dead man's face. He sniffed at the blue, twisted lips. Then he picked up the glass from which Anthony Marston had been drinking. General MacArthur said,
"Dead? Do you mean the fellow just choked and died?"
The physician said,
"You can call it choking if you like. He died of asphyxiation right enough."
He was sniffing now at the glass. He dipped a finger into the dregs and very cautiously just touched the finger with the tip of his tongue. His expression altered.
General MacArthur said, "Never knew a man could die like that, just of a choking fit."
Emily Brent said in a clear voice, "In the midst of life, we are in death." Dr. Armstrong stood up. He said brusquely,
"No, a man doesn't die of a mere choking fit. Marston's death wasn't what we call a natural death."
Vera almost said in a whisper, "Was there something in the whiskey?" Armstrong nodded.
"Yes, can't say exactly. Everything points to one of the cyanides. No distinctive smell of prussic acid. Probably potassium cyanide. It acts pretty well instantaneously."
The judge said sharply,
"It was in his glass?"
"Yes." The doctor strode to the table where the drinks were. He removed the stopper from the whiskey and smelt and tasted it. Then he tasted the soda water. He shook his head.
"They're both all right."
Lombard said,
"You mean he must have put the stuff in his glass himself?"
Armstrong nodded with a curiously dissatisfied expression. He said,
"Seems like it."
Bloor said,
"Suicide, eh? That's a queer go."
Vera said slowly, "You'd never think that he would kill himself. He was so alive. He was enjoying himself. When he came down the hill in his car this evening, he looked, oh, I can't explain." But they knew what she meant. Anthony Marston, in the height of his youth and manhood, had seemed like a being who was immortal, and now, crumpled and broken, he lay on the floor. Dr. Armstrong said,
"Is there any possibility other than suicide?"
Slowly, everyone shook his head. There could be no other explanations. The drinks themselves were untampered with. They had all seen Anthony Marston go across and help himself. It followed, therefore, that any cyanide in the drink must have been put there by Anthony Marston himself, and yet, why should Anthony Marston commit suicide? Bloor said thoughtfully,
Doctor, it doesn't seem right to me. I shouldn't have said Mr. Marston was a suicidal type of gentleman."
Armstrong answered,
"I agree."
They had left it like that. What else was there to say? Together, Armstrong and Lombard had carried the inert body of Anthony Marston to his bedroom and had him laid there, covered with a sheet. When they came downstairs again, the others were standing in a group, shivering a little, though the night was not cold. Emily Brent said, "We'd better go to bed. It's late. It was past 12 o'clock. The suggestion was a wise one, yet everyone hesitated. It was as though they clung to each other's company for reassurance. The judge said,
Yes, we must get some sleep.
Rogers said,
I haven't cleared yet in the dining room.
Lombard said curtly,
Do it in the morning.
Armstrong said to him, Is your wife all right?
I'll go and see, sir.
He returned a minute or two later.
Sleeping beautiful, she is.
Good, said the doctor. Don't disturb her.
No, sir. I'll just put things straight in the dining room and make sure everything's locked up right. And then I'll turn in.
He went across the hall into the dining room. The others went upstairs, a slow, unwilling procession. If this had been an old house with creaking wood and dark shadows, and heavily paneled walls, there might have been an eerie feeling. But this house was the essence of modernity. There were no dark corners, no possible sliding panels. It was flooded with electric light. Everything was new and bright and shining. There was nothing hidden in this house, nothing concealed. It had no atmosphere about it. Somehow that was the most frightening thing of all. They exchanged good nights on the upper landing. Each of them went into his or her own room, and each of them automatically, almost without conscious thought, locked the door. In his pleasant, softly tinted room, Mr. Justice Wargrave removed his garments and prepared himself for bed. He was thinking about Edward Seton. He remembered Seton very well. His fair hair, his blue eyes, his habit of looking you straight in the face with a pleasant air of straightforwardness. That was what had made so good an impression on the jury. Llewellyn, for the crown, had bungled it a bit. He had been over-vehement, had tried to prove too much. Matthews, on the other hand, for the defense, had been good. His points had told. His cross-examinations had been deadly. His handling of his client in the witness box had been masterly. And Seton had come through the ordeal of cross-examination well. He had not got excited or over-vehement. The jury had been impressed. It had seemed to Matthews, perhaps, as though everything had been over bar the shouting. The judge wound up his watch carefully and placed it by the bed. He remembered exactly how he had felt sitting there, listening, making notes, appreciating everything, tabulating every scrap of evidence that told against the prisoner. He had enjoyed that case. Matthew's final speech had been first class. Llewellyn, coming after it, had failed to remove the good impression that the defending counsel had made. And then had come his own summing up. Carefully, Mr. Justice Wargrave removed his false teeth and dropped them into a glass of water. The shrunken lips fell in. It was a cruel mouth now, cruel and predatory. Hooding his eyes, the judge smiled to himself. He'd cooked Seton's goose, all right. With a slightly rheumatic grunt, he climbed into bed and turned out the electric light. Downstairs in the dining room, Rogers stood puzzled. He was staring at the china figures in the center of the table. He muttered to himself,
That's a rum go. I could have sworn there were 10 of them.
General MacArthur tossed from side to side. Sleep would not come to him. In the darkness, he kept seeing Arthur Richmond's face. He'd liked Arthur. He'd been damned fond of Arthur. He'd been pleased that Leslie liked him too. Leslie was so capricious. Lots of good fellows that Leslie would turn up her nose at and pronounce dull. Dull, just like that. But she hadn't found Arthur Richmond dull. They got on well together from the beginning. They'd talk of plays and music and pictures together. She'd tease him, made fun of him, ragged him, and he, MacArthur, had been delighted at the thought that Leslie took quite a motherly interest in the boy. Motherly indeed. Damn fool not to remember that Richmond was 28 to Leslie's 29. He loved Leslie. He could see her now, her heart-shaped face and her dancing deep gray eyes and the brown curling mass of her hair. He'd loved Leslie and he'd believed in her absolutely. Out there in France, in the middle of all the hell of it, he'd sat thinking of her, taken her picture out of the breast pocket of his tunic. And then he'd found out. It had come about exactly in the way things happened in books. The letter in the wrong envelope. She'd been writing to them both, and she'd put her letter to Richmond in the envelope addressed to her husband. Even now, all those years after, he could feel the shock of it, the pain. God, it had hurt. And the business had been going on some time. The letter made that clear. Weekends, Richmond's last leave, Leslie and Arthur. God damn the fellow. Damn his smiling face, his brisk, yes sir, liar and hypocrite, stealer of another man's wife. It had gathered slowly, the cold, murderous rage. He'd managed to carry on as usual, to show nothing. He tried to make his manner to Richmond just the same. Had he succeeded? He thought so. Richmond hadn't suspected. Inequalities of temper were easily accounted for out there, where men's nerves were continually snapping under the strain. Only young Armitage had looked at him curiously once or twice. Quite a young chap, but he'd had perceptions, that boy. Armitage, perhaps, had guessed, when the time came. He'd sent Richmond deliberately to his death. Only a miracle could have brought him through unhurt. That miracle didn't happen. Yes, he'd sent Richmond to his death, and he wasn't sorry. It had been easy enough. Mistakes were being made all the time. Officers being sent to death needlessly. All was confusion, panic. People might say afterwards, oh, old MacArthur lost his nerve a bit, made some colossal blunders, sacrificed some of his best men. They couldn't say more. But young Armitage was different. He'd looked at his commanding officer very oddly. He'd known, perhaps, that Richmond was being sent deliberately to death, and after the war was over, had Armitage talked? Leslie hadn't known. Leslie had wept for her lover, he supposed, but her weeping was over by the time he'd come back to England. He never told her that he'd found her out. They'd gone on together, only somehow she hadn't seemed very real anymore. And then 3 or 4 years later, she got double pneumonia and died. That had been a long time ago. 15, 16 years? And he'd left the army and come to live in Devon. Bought the sort of little place he'd always meant to have. Nice neighbors. Pleasant part of the world. There was a bit of shooting and fishing. He'd gone to church on Sundays, but not the day that the lesson was read about David putting Uriah in the forefront of the battle. Somehow he couldn't face that. Gave him an uncomfortable feeling. Everybody had been very friendly, at first, that is. Later, he had an uneasy feeling that people were talking about him behind his back. They eyed him differently somehow, as though they heard something, some lying rumor. Armitage? Supposing Armitage had talked. He'd avoid people after that, withdrawn into himself. Unpleasant to feel that people were discussing you. And all so long ago, so purposeless now. Leslie had faded into the distance, and Arthur Richmond too. Nothing of what had happened seemed to matter anymore. It made life lonely, though. He'd taken to shunning his old army friends. If Armitage had talked, they'd know about it. And now, this evening, a hidden voice had blared out that old hidden story. Had he dealt with it all right? Kept a stiff upper lip? Betrayed the right amount of feeling? Indignation, disgust, but no guilt, no discomfiture. Difficult to tell. Surely nobody could have taken the accusation seriously. There had been a pack of other nonsense just as far-fetched. That charming girl, the voice had accused her of drowning a child. Idiotic. Some madman throwing crazy accusations about. Emily Brent, too. Actually a niece of old Tom Brent of the regiment? It had accused her of murder. Anyone could see with half an eye that the woman was as pious as could be. The kind that was hand in glove with Parsons. Damn curious business, this whole thing. Crazy, nothing less. Ever since they had got here. When was that? Why, damn it, it was only this afternoon. Seemed a good bit longer than that. He thought,
I wonder when we shall get away again. Tomorrow, of course, when the motorboat comes from the mainland.
Funny. Just this minute he didn't want much to get away from the island. To go back to the mainland, back to his little house, back to all the troubles and worries. Through the open window he could hear the waves breaking on the rocks. A little louder now than earlier in the evening. Wind was getting up too. He thought,
peaceful sound. Peaceful place.
He thought,
best of an island is once you get there. You can't go any further. You've come to the end of things.
He knew suddenly that he didn't want to leave this island. Vera Claythorne lay in bed, wide awake, staring up at the ceiling. The light beside her was on. She was frightened of the dark. She was thinking, Hugo, Hugo, why do I fear you're so near me tonight? Somewhere quite close. Where is he really? I don't know. I shall never know. He just went away, right away, out of my life. It was no good trying not to think of Hugo. He was close to her. She had to think of him, to remember. Cornwall. The black rocks, the smooth, yellow sand. Mrs. Hamilton, stout, good-humored. Cyril, whining a little always, pulling at her hand. I want to swim out to the rock, Miss Claythorne. Why can't I swim out to the rock? Looking up, meeting Hugo's eyes watching her. The evenings after Cyril was in bed.
Come out for a stroll, Miss Claythorne.
I think perhaps I will. The decorous stroll down to the beach. The moonlight, the soft Atlantic air, and then Hugo's arms round her.
I love you. I love you. You know I love you, Vera.
Yes, she knew, or thought she knew.
I can't ask you to marry me. I've not got a penny. It's all I can do to keep myself. Queer, you know, once for 3 months, I had the chance of being a rich man to look forward to. Cyril wasn't born until 3 months after Maurice died. If he'd been a girl...
If the child had been a girl, Hugo would have come into everything. He'd been disappointed, he admitted.
I hadn't built on it, of course, but it was a bit of a knock. Oh well, luck's luck. Cyril's a nice kid. I'm awfully fond of him.
And he was fond of him too, always ready to play games or amuse his small nephew. No rancor in Hugo's nature. Cyril wasn't really strong, a puny child, no stamina, the kind of child perhaps who wouldn't live to grow up. And then, Miss Claythorne, why can't I swim to the rock? Irritating, whiny repetition. It's too far, Cyril. But Miss Claythorne... Vera got up. She went to the dressing table and swallowed 3 aspirins. She thought, I wish I had some proper sleeping stuff. She thought, if I were doing away with myself, I'd take an overdose of Veronal. Something like that. Not cyanide. She shuddered as she remembered Anthony Marston's convulsed purple face. As she passed the mantelpiece, she looked up at the framed doggerel. 10 little soldier boys went out to dine. One choked his little self, and then there were 9. She thought to herself, "It's horrible, just like us this evening." Why had Anthony Marston wanted to die? She didn't want to die. She couldn't imagine wanting to die. Death was for other people. Chapter 6. Dr. Armstrong was dreaming. It was very hot in the operating room. Surely they got the temperature too high. The sweat was rolling down his face. His hands were clammy. Difficult to hold the scalpel firmly. How beautifully sharp it was. Easy to do a murder with a knife like that. And of course, he was doing a murder. The woman's body looked different. It had been a large, unwieldy body. This was a spare, meager body, and the face was hidden. Who was it that he had to kill? He couldn't remember, but he must know. Should he ask Sister? Sister was watching him. No, he couldn't ask her. She was suspicious, he could see that. But who was it on the operating table? They shouldn't have covered up the face like that. If he could only see the face. Ah, that was better. A young probationer was pulling off the handkerchief. Emily Brent, of course. It was Emily Brent that he had to kill. How malicious her eyes were. Her lips were moving. What was she saying? In the midst of life, we are in death. She was laughing now. No, nurse, don't put the handkerchief back. I've got to see. I've got to give the anesthetic. Where's the ether? I must have brought the ether with me. What have you done with the ether, sister? Chateau Neuf du Pape? Yes, that will do quite as well. Take the handkerchief away, nurse. Of course. I knew it all the time. It's Anthony Marston. His face is purple and convulsed, but he's not dead. He's laughing. I tell you, he's laughing. He's shaking the operating table. Look out, Nan, look out. Nurse, steady it. Steady it. With a start, Dr. Armstrong woke up. It was morning. Sunlight was pouring into the room, and someone was leaning over him, shaking him. It was Rogers. Rogers with a white face saying, "Doctor! Doctor!" Dr. Armstrong woke up completely. He sat up in bed. He said sharply, "What is it?" "It's the wife, doctor. I can't get her to wake. My God, I can't get her to wake, and she don't look right to me." Dr. Armstrong was quick and efficient. He wrapped himself in his dressing gown and followed Rogers. He bent over the bed where the woman was lying peacefully on her side. He lifted the cold hand, raised the eyelid. It was some few minutes before he straightened himself and turned from the bed. Rogers whispered, Is she? He passed a tongue over dry lips. Armstrong nodded. Yes, she's gone. His eyes rested thoughtfully on the man before him. Then they went to the table by the bed, to the washstand, then back to the sleeping woman. Rogers said, Was it her heart, doctor?" Dr. Armstrong was a minute or two before replying. Then he said, "What was her health like, normally?" Roger said, "She was a bit rheumaticky." "Any doctor been attending her recently?" "Doctor?" Roger stared. "Not been to a doctor for years. Neither of us." "You'd no reason to believe she suffered from heart trouble." "No, doctor, I never knew of anything." Armstrong said, "Did she sleep well?" Now Roger's eyes evaded his. The man's hands came together and turned and twisted uneasily. He muttered,
She didn't sleep extra well, no.
The doctor said sharply,
Did she take things to make her sleep?
Roger stared at him surprised.
Take things to make her sleep? Not that I knew of, I'm sure she didn't.
Armstrong went over to the washstand. There were a certain number of bottles on it: hair lotion, lavender water, cascara, glycerin of cucumber for the hands, a mouthwash, toothpaste, and some elements. Rogers helped by pulling out the drawers of the dressing table. From there they moved on to the chest of drawers, but there was no sign of sleeping draughts or tablets. Rogers said,
She didn't have nothing last night, sir, except what you gave her.
When the gong sounded for breakfast at 9 o'clock, it found everyone up and awaiting the summons. General MacArthur and the judge had been pacing the terrace outside, exchanging desultory comments on the political situation. Vera Claythorne and Philip Lombard had been up in the summit of the island behind the house. There they had discovered William Henry Blore, standing staring at the mainland. He said,
No sign of that motorboat yet. I've been watching for it.
Vera said, smiling, Devon's a sleepy county. Things are usually late. Philip Lombard was looking the other way out to sea. He said abruptly,
What do you think of the weather?
Glancing up at the sky, Blore remarked,
It looks all right to me.
Lombard pursed up his mouth into a whistle. He said,
It will come on to blow before the day's out.
Blore said,
Squally, eh?
From below them came the boom of a gong. Philip Lombard said,
Breakfast? Well, I could do with some.
As they went down the steep slope, Blore said to Lombard in a ruminating voice,
You know, it beats me. Why that young fellow wanted to do himself in. I've been worrying about it all night.
Vera was a little ahead. Lombard hung back slightly. He said, Got any alternative theory?
I'd want some proof. Motive, to begin with. Well off, I should say he was.
Emily Brent came out of the drawing room window to meet them. She said sharply, Is the boat coming? Not yet, said Vera. They went in to breakfast. There was a vast dish of eggs and bacon on the sideboard, and tea and coffee. Rogers held the door open for them to pass in, then shut it from the outside. Emily Brent said, That man looks ill this morning. Dr. Armstrong, who was standing by the window, cleared his throat. He said,
You must excuse any, shortcomings this morning. Rogers has to do the best he can for breakfast single-handed. Mrs. Rogers has, not been able to carry on this morning.
Emily Brent said sharply, What's the matter with the woman? Dr. Armstrong said easily,
Let us start our breakfast. The eggs will get cold. Afterwards, there are several matters I want to discuss with you all.
They took the hint. Plates were filled, coffee and tea were poured. The meal began. Discussion of the island was by mutual consent taboo. They spoke instead in a desultory fashion of current events. News from abroad, events in the world of sport, the latest reappearance of the Loch Ness Monster. Then, when plates were cleared, Dr. Armstrong moved back his chair a little, cleared his throat importantly, and spoke. He said, I thought it better to wait until you had had your breakfast before telling you of a sad piece of news. Mrs. Rogers died in her sleep. There were startled and shocked ejaculations. Vera exclaimed, How awful! 2 deaths on this island since we arrived. Mr. Justice Wargrave, his eyes narrowed, said in his small, precise, clear voice,
Very remarkable. What was the cause of death?
Armstrong shrugged his shoulders. Impossible to say offhand.
There must be an autopsy.
I certainly couldn't give a certificate. I have no knowledge whatsoever of the woman's state of health. Okay, pause. I'm seeing some reactions in chat. Yes, it's a funny word, but it basically means exclamations. Very shocked gasps or outcries, or it's an old-fashioned word. We don't use it like that anymore. But yes, that used to be a turn of phrase. It's no less funny, but anyway, moving on. Why does every person in old books listen, what else was there to do at the time? Okay, moving on now. Vera said, She was a very nervous looking creature, and she had a shock last night. It might have been heart failure, I suppose. Dr. Armstrong said dryly, Her heart certainly failed to beat, but what caused it to fail is the question. One word fell from Emily Brent. It fell hard and clear into the listening group. Conscience, she said. Armstrong turned to her. What exactly do you mean by that, Miss Brent? Emily Brent, her lips tight and hard, said, You all heard. She was accused, together with her husband, of having deliberately murdered her former employer, an old lady. And you think? Emily Brent said, I think that accusation was true. You all saw her last night. She broke down completely and fainted. The shock of having her wickedness brought home to her was too much for her. She literally died of fear. Dr. Armstrong shook his head doubtfully. It is a possible theory, he said. One cannot adopt it without more exact knowledge of her state of health. If there was cardiac weakness. Emily Brent said quietly, Call it, if you prefer, an act of God. Everyone looked shocked. Mr. Bloor said uneasily, Well, that's carrying things a bit far, Miss Brent. She looked at them with shining eyes. Her chin went up. She said, You regard it as impossible that a sinner should be struck down by the wrath of God. I do not. The judge stroked his chin. He murmured in a slightly ironic voice,
My dear lady, in my experience of ill-doing, Providence leaves the work of conviction and chastisement to us mortals, and the process is often fraught with difficulties. There are no shortcuts.
Emily Brent shrugged her shoulders. Bloor said sharply,
What did she have to eat and drink last night after she went up to bed?
Armstrong said,
Nothing. She didn't take anything. A cup of tea. A drink of water. I'll bet you she had a cup of tea. That sort always does.
Rogers assures me that she had nothing whatsoever.
Ah, said Bloor. but you might say so.
His tone was so significant that the doctor looked up at him sharply. Philip Lombard said, "So that's your idea." Blore said aggressively,
Well, why not? We all heard that accusation last night. Maybe sheer moonshine, just plain lunacy. On the other hand, it may not. Allow for that moment that it's true. Rogers and his missus polished off that old lady. Well, where's that get you? They've been feeling quite safe and happy about it.
Vera interrupted. In a low voice she said, "No, I don't think Mrs. Rogers ever felt safe." Blore looked slightly annoyed at the interruption.
Just like a woman,
his glance said. He resumed,
Well, that's as may be. Anyway, there's no active danger to them as far as they know. Then last night, some unknown lunatic spills the beans, or what happens? The woman cracks, she goes to pieces, knows how her husband hung over her she was coming round. Not all husbandly solicitude, not only all life. He was like a cat on hot bricks, scared out of his life as to what she might say. And there's the position for you. They've done a murder and got away with it. But what if the whole thing's going to be raked up? What's going to happen? 10 to 1, the woman will give the show away. She hasn't got the nerve to stand up and brazen it out. She's a living danger to her husband. That's what she is. He's all right. He'll lie with a straight face till kingdom come. But he can't be sure of her. And if she goes to pieces, his neck's in danger. So he slips something into a cup of tea, makes sure that her mouth is shut permanently.
Armstrong said slowly, "There was no empty cup by her bedside. There was nothing there at all. I looked."
Blore snorted. Course there wouldn't be. First thing he'd do when she drunk it would be to take that cup and sauce her away and wash her up carefully.
There was a pause, then General MacArthur said doubtfully,
It may be so, but I should hardly think it possible that a man would do that to his wife.
Blore gave a short laugh. He said,
When a man's neck's in danger, he doesn't stop to think too much about sentiment.
There was a pause. Before anyone could speak, the door opened and Rogers came in. He said, looking from one to the other,
Is there anything more I can get you? I'm sorry there was so little toast, but we've run right out of bread. The new bread hasn't come over from the mainland yet.
Mr. Justice Wargrave stirred a little in his chair. He asked,
What time does the motorboat usually come over?
Between 7 and 8, sir. Sometimes it's a bit after 8. Don't know what Fred Narracott can be doing this morning. If he's ill, he'd send his brother.
Philip Lombard said, What's the time now?
10 minutes to 10, sir.
Lombard's eyebrows rose. He nodded, slowly, to himself. Rogers waited a minute or two. General MacArthur spoke suddenly and explosively.
Sorry to hear about your wife, Rogers. Doctor's just been telling us.
Rogers inclined his head.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
He took up the empty bacon dish and went out. Again, there was silence. On the terrace outside, Philip Lombard said, About this motorboat. Blore looked at him. Blore nodded his head. He said,
I know what you're thinking, Mr. Lombard. I've asked myself the same question. Motorboat ought to have been here nigh on 2 hours ago. Who hasn't come? Why is that?
Found the answer? Asked Lombard.
It's not an accident. Well, that's what I say. It's part and parcel of the whole business. It's all bound up together.
Philip Lombard said,
It won't come, you think?
A voice spoke behind him, a testy, impatient voice.
The motorboat's not coming, he said.
Blore turned his square shoulders slightly and viewed the last speaker thoughtfully.
You think not too, General?
General MacArthur said sharply, "Of course it won't come. We're counting on the motorboat to take us off the island. That's the meaning of the whole business. We're not going to leave the island. None of us will ever leave. It's the end, you see, the end of everything." He hesitated, then he said in a low, strange voice, "That's peace. Real peace. To come to the end. Not to have to go on. Yes. Peace." He turned abruptly and walked away, along the terrace, then down the slope toward the sea, obliquely, to the end of the island where loose rocks went out into the water. He walked a little unsteadily, like a man who was only half awake. Blore said,
Well, there goes another one who's balmy. Looks as though it'll end with the whole lot going that way.
Philip Lombard said, "I don't fancy you will, Blore." The ex-inspector laughed.
It will take a lot to send me off my head, he said dryly. I don't think you'll be going that way either, Mr. Lombard.
Philip Lombard said, "I feel quite sane at the minute. Thank you." Dr. Armstrong came out onto the terrace. He stood there hesitating. To his left were Blore and Lombard. To his right was Wargrave, slowly pacing up and down, his head bent down. Armstrong, after a moment of indecision, turned towards the latter. But at that moment, Rogers came quickly out of the house.
"Could I have a word with you, sir, please?"
Armstrong turned. He was startled at what he saw. Roger's face was working. Its color was grayish-green. His hands shook. It was such a contrast to his restraint of a few minutes ago that Armstrong was quite taken aback.
"Please, sir, if I could have a word with you. Inside, sir."
The doctor turned back and re-entered the house with the frenzied butler. He said, "What's the matter, man? Pull yourself together."
"In here, sir. Come in here."
He opened the dining room door. The doctor passed in. Rogers followed him and shut the door behind him. "Well," said Armstrong, "what is it?" The muscles of Roger's throat were working. He was swallowing. He jerked out,
"There's things going on, sir, that I don't understand."
Armstrong said sharply, "Things? What things?"
"You'll think I'm crazy, sir. You'll say it isn't anything. But it's got to be explained, sir. It's got to be explained. Because it doesn't make any sense."
"Well, man, tell me what it is. Don't go on talking in riddles." Rogers swallowed again. He said,
"It's those little figures, sir, in the middle of the table. The little china figures. 10 of them there were, I'll swear to that. 10 of them."
Armstrong said, "Yes, 10. We counted them last night at dinner." Rogers came nearer.
"That's just it, sir. Last night when I was clearing up, there wasn't but 9, sir. I noticed it and thought it queer. But that's all I thought. And now, sir, this morning, I didn't notice when I laid the breakfast. I was upset and all that, but now, sir, when I came to clear away, see for yourself if you don't believe me. There's only 8, sir. Only 8. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Only 8.
Chapter 7. After breakfast, Emily Brent had suggested to Vera Claythorne that they should walk up to the summit again and watch for the boat. Vera had acquiesced. The wind had freshened. Small white crests were appearing on the sea. There were no fishing boats out and no sign of the motorboat. The actual village of Sticklehaven could not be seen, only the hill above it. A jutting out cliff of red rock concealed the actual little bay. Emily Brent said, "The man who brought us out yesterday seemed a dependable sort of person. It's really very odd that he should be so late this morning." Vera did not answer. She was fighting down a rising feeling of panic. She said to herself angrily, "You must keep cool. This isn't like you. You've always had excellent nerves." Aloud, she said after a minute or two, "I wish he would come. I want to get away." Emily Brent said dryly, "I've no doubt we all do." Vera said, "It's all so extraordinary. There seems no meaning in it all." The elderly woman beside her said briskly, "I'm very annoyed with myself for being too easily taken in. Really, that letter is absurd when one comes to examine it. But I had no doubts at the time. None at all." Vera murmured mechanically, "I suppose not." "One takes things for granted too much," said Emily Brent. Vera drew a deep, shuddering breath. She said, "Do you really think what you said at breakfast? Be a little more precise, my dear. To what in particular are you referring?" Vera said in a low voice, "Do you really think that Rogers and his wife did away with that old lady?" Emily Brent gazed thoughtfully out to sea. Then she said, "Personally, I am quite sure of it. What do you think?" "I don't know what to think." Emily Brent said, "Everything goes to support the idea. The way the woman fainted, and the man dropped the coffee tray, remember? Then the way he spoke about it. It didn't ring true." "Oh yes, I'm afraid they did it." Vera said, "The way she looked, scared of her own shadow. I've never seen a woman look so frightened. She must have been always haunted by it." Miss Brent murmured, "I remember a text that hung in my nursery as a child. 'Be sure thy sin will find thee out.' It's very true that. 'Be sure thy sin will find thee out.'" Vera scrambled to her feet. She said, "But Miss Brent, in that case—" "Yes, my dear. The others. What about the others?" "I don't quite understand you." "All the other accusations, they weren't true. But if it's true about the Rogerses—" She stopped, unable to make her chaotic thought clear. Emily Brent's brow, which had been frowning perplexedly, cleared. She said, "Oh, I understand you now. Well, there is that Mr. Lombard. He admits to having abandoned 20 men to their deaths." Vera said, "Well, they were only natives." Emily Brent said sharply, "Black or white, they are our brothers." Vera thought, "Our black brothers. Our black brothers." I'm going to laugh. I'm hysterical. I'm not myself. Emily Brent continued thoughtfully, "Of course, some of the other accusations were very far-fetched and ridiculous. Against the judge, for instance, who was only doing his duty in his public capacity, and the ex-Scotland Yard man. My own case, too." She paused and then went on. "Naturally, considering the circumstances, I was not going to say anything last night. It was not a fit subject to discuss before gentlemen." "No?" Vera listened with interest. Miss Brent continued serenely, "Beatrice Taylor was in service with me. Not a nice girl, as I found out too late. I was very much deceived by her. She had nice manners and was very clean and willing. I was very pleased with her. Of course, all that was the sheerest hypocrisy. She was a loose girl with no morals. Disgusting. It was some time before I found out that she was what they call in trouble." She paused, her delicate nose wrinkling itself in distaste. "It was a great shock to me.
Her parents were decent folk, too, who had brought her up very strictly. I'm glad to say that they did not condone her behavior.
Vera said, staring at Miss Brent. What happened?
Naturally, I did not keep her an hour under my roof. No one shall ever say that I condoned immorality.
Vera said in a lower voice, What happened to her?
Miss Brent said, the abandoned creature, not content with having one sin on her conscience, committed a still graver sin. She took her own life.
Vera whispered, horror-struck, She killed herself.
Yes, she threw herself into the river.
Vera shivered. She stared at the calm, delicate profile of Miss Brent. She said, What did you feel like when you knew she'd done that? Weren't you sorry? Didn't you blame yourself? Emily Brent drew herself up.
I had nothing with which to reproach myself.
Vera said, But if your hardness drove her to it, Emily Brent said sharply,
Her own action, her own sin, that was what drove her to it. If she had behaved like the decent, modest young woman, none of this would have happened.
She turned her face to Vera. There was no self-reproach, no uneasiness in those eyes. They were hard and self-righteous. Emily Brent sat on the summit of Soldier Island, encased in her own armor of virtue. The little elderly spinster was no longer slightly ridiculous to Vera. Suddenly, she was terrible. Dr. Armstrong came out of the dining room and once more came out on the terrace. The judge was sitting in a chair now, gazing placidly out to sea. Lombard and Bloor were over to the left, smoking but not talking. As before, the doctor hesitated for a moment. His eyes rested speculatively on Mr. Justice Wargrave. He wanted to consult with someone. He was conscious of the judge's acute logical brain. But nevertheless, he wavered. Mr. Justice Wargrave might have a good brain, but he was an elderly man. At this juncture, Armstrong felt what was needed was a man of action. He made up his mind. Lombard, can I speak to you for a minute? Philip started. Of course. The two men left the terrace. They strolled down the slope toward the water. When they were out of earshot, Armstrong said, I want a consultation. Lombard's eyebrows went up. He said, My dear fellow, I've no medical knowledge. No, I mean as to the general situation. Oh, that's different. Armstrong said, Frankly, what do you make? What do you think of the position? Lombard reflected a minute, then he said, It's rather suggestive, isn't it? What are your ideas on the subject of that woman? Do you accept Bloor's theory? Philip puffed smoke into the air. He said, It's perfectly feasible, taken alone. I'm gonna pause right here and get some water. I'll be right back. Make sure you guys also get something to drink, okay? Okay. Throat's nice and hydrated again.
It's perfectly feasible taken alone. Exactly.
Armstrong's tone sounded relieved. Philip Lombard was no fool. The latter went on.
That is, accepting the premise that Mr. and Mrs. Rogers have successfully got away with murder in their time. And I don't see why they shouldn't. What do you think they did exactly? Poison the old lady?
Armstrong said slowly,
It might be simpler than that. I asked Rogers this morning what this Miss Brady had suffered from. His answer was enlightening. I don't need to go into medical details, but in a certain form of cardiac trouble, amyl nitrate is used. When an attack comes on, an ampule of amyl nitrate is broken and it is inhaled. If amyl nitrate were withheld, well, the consequences might easily be fatal.
Philip Lombard said thoughtfully.
As simple as that. It must have been rather tempting.
The doctor nodded.
Yes, no positive action, no arsenic to obtain and administer. Nothing definite, just negation. And Rogers hurried through the night to fetch the doctor, and they both felt confident that no one would ever know. And, even if anyone knew, nothing could ever be proved against them,
added Philip Lombard.
He frowned suddenly. Of course. That explains a good deal.
Armstrong said, puzzled.
I beg your pardon?
Lombard said,
I mean, it explains Soldier Island. There are crimes that cannot be brought home to their perpetrators. Instance, the Rogerses. Another instance, Old Wargrave, who committed his murder strictly within the law. Armstrong says sharply, You believe that story?
Philip Lombard smiled.
Oh yes, I believe it. Wargrave murdered Edward Stetton, all right. Murdered him as surely as if he'd stuck a stiletto through him. But he was clever enough to do it from the judge's seat in wig and gown, so, in the ordinary way, you can't bring his little crime home to him.
A sudden flash passed like lightning through Armstrong's mind. Murder in hospital. Murder on the operating table. Safe. Yes, safe as houses. Philip Lombard was saying,
Hence, Mr. Owen, hence Soldier Island.
Armstrong drew a deep breath.
Now we're getting down to it. What's the real purpose of getting us all here?
Philip Lombard said,
What do you think?
Armstrong said abruptly,
Let's go back a minute to this woman's death. What are the possible theories? Rogers killed her because he was afraid she would give the show away. Second possibility, she lost her nerve and took an easy way out herself.
Philip Lombard said,
Suicide, eh? What do you say to that?
Lombard said,
It could have been, yes. If it hadn't been for Marston's death.
2 suicides within 12 hours is a little too much to swallow.
And if you tell me that Anthony Marston, a young bull with no nerves and precious little brains, got the wind-up over having mowed down a couple of kids and deliberately put himself out of the way, well, the idea is laughable.
And anyway, how did he get hold of the stuff? From all I've ever heard, potassium cyanide isn't the kind of stuff you take with you in your waistcoat pocket. But that's your line of country. Armstrong said,
Nobody in their senses carries potassium cyanide. It might be done by someone who is going to take a wasp's nest.
The ardent gardener?
or landowner, in fact. Again, not Anthony Marston. It strikes me that cyanide is going to need a bit of explaining. Either Anthony Marston meant to do away with himself before he came here, and therefore came prepared, or else. Armstrong prompted him.
Or else?
Philip Lombard grinned. Why make me say it? When it's on the tip of your own tongue. Anthony Marston was murdered, of course. Dr. Armstrong drew a deep breath.
And Mrs. Rogers?
Lombard said slowly, I could believe in Anthony's suicide, with difficulty. If it weren't for Mrs. Rogers, I could believe in Mrs. Rogers' suicide, easily. If it weren't for Anthony Marston, I can believe that Rogers put his wife out of the way, if it were not for the unexplained death of Anthony Marston. But what we need is a theory to explain two deaths following rapidly on each other. Armstrong said, I can perhaps give you some help towards that theory. And he reached the facts that Rogers had given him about the disappearance of the two little china figures. Lombard said, Yes, little china soldier figures. There were certainly 10 last night at dinner, and now there are 8, you said. Dr. Armstrong recited, 10 little soldier boys going out to dine. One went and choked himself, and then there were 9. 9 little soldier boys sat up very late. One overslept himself, and then there were 8. The two men looked at each other. Philip Lombard grinned and flung away his cigarette. Fits too damn well to be a coincidence. Anthony Marston dies of asphyxiation, or choking, last night after dinner, and Mother Rogers oversleeps herself with a vengeance. And therefore, said Armstrong. Lombard took him up. And therefore, another kind of puzzle. The N-word in the wood pile. X. Mr. Owen. U.N. Owen, one unknown lunatic at large. Ah, Armstrong breathed a sigh of relief. You agree. But you see what it involves. Rogers swore that there was no one but ourselves and him and his wife on the island. Rogers is wrong. Or possibly Rogers is lying. Armstrong shook his head. I don't think he's lying. The man's scared. He's scared nearly out of his senses. Philip Lombard nodded. He said, No motorboat this morning. That fits in. Mr. Owen's little arrangements again to the fore. Soldier Island is to be isolated until Mr. Owen has finished his job. Armstrong had gone pale. He said, You realize the man must be a raving lunatic, a maniac. Philip Lombard said, and there was a new ring in his voice. There's one thing Mr. Owen didn't realize. What's that? This island's more or less a bare rock. We shall make short work of searching it. We'll soon ferret out U.N. Owen, Esquire. Dr. Armstrong said warningly, He'll be dangerous. Philip Lombard laughed. Dangerous? Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? I'll be dangerous when I get hold of him. He paused and said, We'd better rope in Blore to help us. He'll be a good man in a pinch. Better not tell the women. As for the others, the general's Gaga, I think, and old Wargrave's forte is masterly inactivity. The 3 of us can attend to this job.
Chapter 8. Wow, we're going through these chapters pretty fast tonight. Blore was easily roped in. He expressed immediate agreement with their arguments.
What you've said about those china figures, sir, it makes all the difference. That's crazy, that is. There's only one thing. You don't think this Owen's idea might be to do the job by proxy, as it were? Explain yourself, man. Well, I mean it like this. After the rocket last night, this young Mr. Marston gets the wind-up and poisons himself, and Rogers, he gets the wind-up too and bumps off his wife. All according to UNO's plan.
Armstrong shook his head. He stressed the point about the cyanide. Blore agreed.
Well, yes, I'd forgotten that. Not a natural thing to be carrying out with you. But how'd he get into his drink, sir?
Lombard said,
I've been thinking about that. Marston had several drinks last night. Between the time he had his last one and the time he finished the one before it, there was quite a gap. During that time, his glass was lying about on some table or other, I think. I think, though I can't be sure, it was on the little table near the window. The window was open. Somebody could have slipped a dose of the cyanide into the glass.
Blore said unbelievingly,
Without our all seeing him, sir.
Lombard said dryly,
It's easier to believe than the truth, all elsewhere.
Armstrong said slowly,
That's true. We'd all been attacked. We were walking about, moving about the room, arguing, indignant, intent on our own business. I think it could have been done.
Blore shrugged his shoulders.
The fact is, it must have been done. And now then, gentlemen, let's make a start. Nobody's got a revolver by any chance. I suppose that's too much to hope for.
Lombard said, I've got one. He patted his pocket. Blore's eyes opened very wide. He said in an over-casual tone,
We'll always carry that about with you, sir.
Lombard said, Usually. I've been in some tight places, you know.
Oh,
said Blore and added,
Well, you've probably never been in a tighter place than you are today. If there's a lunatic hiding on this island, he's probably got a young arsenal on him. To say nothing of a knife, a dagger or two.
Armstrong coughed. You may be wrong there, Blore. Many homicidal lunatics are very quiet, unassuming people. Delightful fellows. Blore said,
I don't feel like this one is going to be of that kind, Dr. Armstrong.
The three men started on their tour of the island. It proved unexpectedly simple. On the northwest side, towards the coast, the cliffs fell sheer to the sea below, their surface unbroken. On the rest of the island there were no trees and very little cover. The three men worked carefully and methodically, beating up and down from the highest point to the water's edge, narrowly scanning the least irregularity in the rock which might point to the entrance to a cave. But there were no caves. They came at last, skirting the water's edge, to where General MacArthur sat looking out to sea. It was very peaceful here with the lap of the waves breaking over the rocks. The old man sat very upright, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He paid no attention to the approach of the searchers. His oblivion of them made one at least faintly uncomfortable. Blore thought to himself,
"'Tisn't natural. Looks as though he's gone into a trance or something."
He cleared his throat and said in a would-be conversational tone,
"Nice peaceful spot you found for yourself, sir."
The general frowned. He cast a quick look over his shoulder. He said,
There is so little time. So little time. I really must insist that no one disturb me.
Blore said genially.
Oh, we won't disturb you. We're just making a tour of the island, so to speak. Just wondered, if anyone might be hiding on it.
The general frowned and said,
You don't understand. You don't understand at all. Please, go away.
Blore retreated. He said as he joined the other two,
Oh, he's crazy. It's no good talking to him.
Lombard asked with some curiosity,
What did he say?
Blore shrugged his shoulders.
Something about there being no time. He didn't want to be disturbed.
Dr. Armstrong frowned. He murmured,
I wonder now.
The search of the island was practically completed. The three men stood on the highest point looking over towards the mainland. There were no boats out. The wind was freshening. Lombard said,
No fishing boats out. There's a storm coming. Damn nuisance, you can't see the village from here. We could signal or do something.
Blore said,
We might light a bonfire tonight.
Lombard said dryly,
It's easier to believe than the truth. All probably been provided for. In what way, sir? How do I know? Practical joke, perhaps. We're to be marooned here. No attention is to be paid to signals, etc. Possibly the village has been told there's a wager on. Some damn fool story, anyway.
Blore said dubiously,
I think they'd swallow that.
Lombard said dryly,
It's easier of belief than the truth. If the village were told that the island was to be isolated until Mr. Unknown Owen had quietly murdered all his guests, do you think they'd believe that?
Dr. Armstrong said,
There are moments when I can't believe it myself, and yet...
Philip Lombard, his lips curling back from his teeth, said,
And yet... That's just it. You've said it, Doctor.
Blore was gazing down into the water. He said,
Nobody could have clambered down here, I suppose.
Armstrong shook his head.
I doubt it. It's pretty sheer. And where could he hide?
Blore said,
Well, there might be a hole in the cliff. If we had a boat now, we could row round the island.
Lombard said, If we had a boat, we'd all be halfway to the mainland by now.
True enough, sir.
Lombard said suddenly,
We can make sure of this cliff. There's only one place where there could be a recess, just a little to the right, below here. If you fellows can get hold of a rope, you can let me down to make sure.
Blore said,
Might as well be sure, though it seems absurd, on the face of it. I'll see if I can get a hold of something.
He started off briskly down to the house. Lombard stared up at the sky. The clouds were beginning to mass themselves together. The wind was increasing. He shot a sideways look at Armstrong. He said,
You're very silent, Doctor. What are you thinking?
Armstrong said slowly,
I was wondering exactly how mad old MacArthur was.
Vera had been restless all the morning. She had avoided Emily Brent with a kind of shuddering aversion. Miss Brent herself had taken a chair just round the corner of the house so as to be out of the wind. She sat there, knitting. Every time Vera thought of her, she seemed to see a pale, drowned face with seaweed entangled in the hair. A face that had once been pretty, impudently pretty perhaps, and which was now beyond the reach of pity or terror. And Emily Brent, placid and righteous, sat knitting. On the main terrace, Mr. Justice Wargrave sat huddled in a porter's chair. His head was poked down well into his neck. When Vera looked at him, she saw a man standing in the dock. A young man with fair hair and blue eyes and a bewildered, frightened face. Edward Seton. And in imagination, she saw the judge's old hands put the black cap on his head and begin to pronounce sentence. After a while, Vera strolled slowly down to the sea. She walked along towards the extreme end of the horizon where an old man sat staring out on the horizon. General MacArthur stirred at her approach. His head turned. There was a queer mixture of questioning and apprehension in his look. It startled her. He stared intently at her for a minute or two. She thought to herself, "How queer! It's almost as though he knew." He said, "Oh, it's you. You've come." Vera sat down beside him. She said, "Do you like sitting out here, looking out at sea?" He nodded his head quickly and gently. "Yes," he said. "It's pleasant. It's a good place, I think, to wait." "To wait?" said Vera sharply. "What are you waiting for?" He said gently, "The end. But I think you know that, don't you? It's true, isn't it? We're all waiting for the end." She said unsteadily, "What do you mean?" General MacArthur said gravely, "None of us are going to leave the island. That's the plan. You know it, of course. Perfectly. What perhaps you can't understand is the relief." Vera said wonderingly, "The relief?" He nods. "Yes, of course. You're very young. You haven't got to that yet, but it does come. The blessed relief when you know that you're done with it all. That you haven't got to carry the burden any longer. You'll feel that too someday." Vera said hoarsely, "I don't understand you." Her fingers worked spasmodically. She felt suddenly afraid of this quiet old soldier. He said musingly, "You see, I loved Leslie. I loved her very much." Vera said questioningly, "Was Leslie your wife?" "Yes, my wife. I loved her, and I was very proud of her. She was so pretty and so gay." He was silent for a minute or two. Then he said, "Yes, I loved Leslie. That's why I did it." Vera said, "You mean—" and paused. General MacArthur nodded his head gently. "It's not much good denying it now, not when we're all going to die. I sent Richmond to his death. I suppose, in a way, it was murder. Curious. Murder. And I've always been such a law-abiding man. But it didn't seem like that at the time. I had no regrets. Serves him damn well, right? That's what I thought, but afterwards." In a hard voice, Vera said, "Well, afterwards?" He shook his head vaguely. He looked puzzled and a little distressed. "I don't know. I don't know. It was all different, you see. I don't know if Leslie ever guessed.
I don't think so, but you see, I didn't know about her anymore. She'd gone far away where I couldn't reach her, and then she died. And I was alone.
Vera said, "Alone, alone," and the echo of her voice came back to her from the rocks. General MacArthur said,
You'll be glad too, when the end comes.
Vera got up. She said sharply, "I don't know what you mean." He said,
I know, my child. I know.
"You don't. You don't understand at all." General MacArthur looked out to sea again. He seemed unconscious of her presence behind him. He said very gently and softly,
Leslie,
When Bloor entered from the house with a rope coiled over his arm, he found Armstrong where he had left him, staring down into the depths. Bloor said breathlessly,
where's Mr. Lombard?
Armstrong said carelessly,
Going to test some theory or other. He'll be back in a minute. Look here, Bloor. I'm worried.
The doctor waved an impatient hand.
Of course. I don't mean it that way. I'm thinking of old MacArthur. What about him, sir?
Dr. Armstrong said grimly,
What we're looking for is a madman. What price, MacArthur?
Bloor said incredulously,
You mean he's homicidal?
Armstrong said doubtfully,
I shouldn't have said so. Not for a minute. But of course, I'm not a specialist in mental diseases. I haven't really had any conversation with him. I haven't studied him from that point of view.
Bloor said doubtfully,
Gaga, yes. But I wouldn't have said.
Armstrong cut in with a slight effort of a man who pulls himself together.
You're probably right. Damn it all. There must be someone hiding on the island. Here comes Lombard.
They fastened the rope carefully. Lombard said,
I'll help. I'll help myself all I can. Keep a lookout for a sudden strain on the rope.
After a minute or two, while they stood together watching Lombard's progress, Bloor said,
Climbs like a cat, doesn't he?
There was something odd in his voice. Dr. Armstrong said,
I should think he must have done some mountaineering in his time. Maybe.
There was a silence, and the ex-inspector said,
Funny sort of cove altogether. Do you know what I think? What? He's a wrong'un.
Armstrong said doubtfully,
In what way?
Bloor grunted. Then he said,
I don't know exactly, but I wouldn't trust him a yard.
Dr. Armstrong said, I suppose he's led an adventurous life? Blore said,
I bet some of his adventures have had to be kept pretty dark.
He paused and then went on.
Did you happen to bring a revolver along with you, Doctor?
Armstrong stared.
Me?
Good Lord, no. Why should I? Blore said,
Why did Mr. Lombard?
Armstrong said doubtfully, I suppose. Habit? Blore snorted. A sudden pull came on the rope. For some moments they had their hands full. Presently, when the strain relaxed, Blore said,
Habits. And habits. Mr. Lombard takes a revolver to out-of-way places right enough, and a primus and a sleeping bag and a supply of bug powder, no doubt. But habit wouldn't make him bring the whole outfit down here. It's only in books. People carry revolvers around as a matter of course.
Dr. Armstrong shook his head perplexedly. They leaned over and watched Lombard's progress. His search was thorough, and they could see at once that it was futile. Presently he came up over the edge of the cliff. He wiped the perspiration from his forehead.
Well, he said, we're up against it. It's the house or nowhere.
The house was easily searched. They went through the few outbuildings first and then turned their attention to the building itself. Mrs. Rogers' yard measure found in the kitchen dresser assisted them. But there were no hidden spaces left unaccounted for. Everything was plain and straightforward, a modern structure devoid of concealments. They went through the ground floor first. As they mounted to the bedroom floor, they saw through the landing window Rogers carrying out a tray of cocktails to the terrace. Philip Lombard said lightly, "Wonderful animal, the good servant. Carries on with an impassive countenance." Armstrong said appreciatively, "Rogers is a first-class butler. I'll say that for him." Blore said,
His wife was a pretty good cook, too. That dinner last night.
They turned into their first bedroom. 5 minutes later, they faced each other on the landing. No one hiding, no possible hiding place. Blore said,
Well, there's a little stair here.
Dr. Armstrong said, "It leads up to the servants' room." Blore said,
Well, there must be a place under the roof for cisterns, water tank, etc. It's the best chance and the only one.
and it was then, as they stood there, that they heard the sound from above. A soft, furtive footfall overhead. They all heard it. Armstrong grasped Blore's arm. Lombard held up an admonitory finger.
Quiet. Listen.
It came again, someone moving softly, furtively, overhead. Armstrong whispered, "He's actually in the bedroom itself. The room where Mrs. Rogers' body is." Blore whispered back,
Of course.
Best hiding place he could have chosen. Nobody likely to go there. Now then, quiet as you can.
They crept stealthily upstairs. On the little landing outside the door of the bedroom, they paused again. Yes, someone was in the room. There was a faint creak from within. Blore whispered,
Now.
He flung open the door and rushed in, the other two close behind him. Then all three stopped dead. Rogers was in the room, his hands full of garments. Blore recovered himself first. He said,
Sorry, Rogers, I heard someone moving about in here and thought, well. He stopped. Roger said,
I'm sorry, gentlemen. I was just moving my things. I take it there'll be no objections if I take one of the vacant guest chambers on the floor below. The smallest room.
It was to Armstrong that he spoke, and Armstrong replied, Of course, of course. Get on with it. He avoided looking at the sheeted figure lying on the bed. Roger said,
Thank you, sir.
He went out of the room with his arm full of belongings and went down the stairs to the floor below. Armstrong moved over to the bed and, lifting the sheet, looked down on the peaceful face of the dead woman. There was no fear there now, just emptiness. Armstrong said, Wish I'd got my stuff here. I'd like to know what drug it was. Then he turned to the other two. Let's get finished. I feel it in my bones. We're not going to find anything. Blore was wrestling with the bolts of a low manhole. He said, That chap moves damn quietly. A minute or two ago we saw him in the garden. None of us heard him come upstairs. Lombard said, I suppose that's why we assumed it must be a stranger moving about up here. Blore disappeared into a cavernous darkness. Lombard pulled a torch from his pocket and followed. 5 minutes later, 3 men stood on an upper landing and looked at each other. They were dirty and festooned with cobwebs, and their faces were grim. There was no one on the island but their 8 selves. That takes us to the end of chapter 8. I'm debating whether or not to do chapter 9, so I'm looking ahead real quick. Chapter 9's a bit of a longer chapter, so we'll just, I think we'll end it here for today. Maybe just end it a little early and then next time go into it again. And then if next time runs a little bit longer, that's, that's okay. Yeah, it looks like chapter 9 is going to be like about the longest of next week's reading, so it seems like it'll average out, and we'll go from there. We'll see how everybody's feeling, but boy, a lot happened today. There was a lot of truth bombs and there was that preliminary investigation and stuff like that. That was pretty fun. Are we halfway there? Let me see. I think so. Yeah, the last numbered chapter is 16, and then there's an epilogue, so it's about 17 chapters. Well, there's actually 2 epilogues, so we're almost halfway there. But yeah, that was really fun. I think if chapter 9 was a little shorter, I would have read it today, but it's gonna be the longer part of next time, so we'll just cut it here a little early. That's okay. But as for any announcements up ahead, Friday I will be playing more Mirror's Edge. Played that a bit last week as a bit of a sort of flashback Friday impromptu, or not impromptu, but like little bit of a sort of wanted to have a bit of a theme, and that would be, something retro, which is so weird to say, but the game is like almost 18 years old, so And yeah, this Friday I will be playing more of Mirror's Edge and doing some more parkour, free running action. And then I will read more of this next week. I think next week or the week after, I may have 2 reading segments to do the book. So that way I can return it to my library. So, yeah, one of these upcoming weeks, I will do a twofer of this. Aside from that, I don't really have anything else to announce for the moment. I am always thinking about what project to script and stuff for you guys down the road, but right now I don't have anything in mind. Though I have been given a suggestion or two for possible ideas, so maybe one of them will come to fruition if I can figure out a coherent script. But yeah, aside from that, that's pretty much it for my announcements. It's a little sad to go early, but well, I'll see you guys on Friday. So, until then, my wonderful Rainiacs and Langsters, please make sure to remember to eat well, stay hydrated, and get lots of good rest when you can. Be good to yourselves out there, and be excellent to each other. And as always, remember to unshrimp yourselves. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, friends. Thank you for staying by and just hanging out. And I will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Have a radiant rest of your night. Goodbye. Bye 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 bye.